A dark romance series. The Monster Who Owned Me. Part 10. The Only Honest Thing. This is what love looks like. At the end of the hard part. Two people standing in a room full of light. Having survived everything that tried to separate them. Choosing each other anyway. Not because it is easy. Because it is true. Chapter 1. The Painting in the Dark. Violet, October 12th, The Basement. I found him by accident. This was, I had come to understand, a pattern in my relationship with Adrian Kane, finding him in rooms I hadn't known existed, in places the building's official record didn't acknowledge, in the specific privacy of a man who had spent so long arranging things that being found mid-arrangement was one of the few vulnerabilities he hadn't fully learned to accommodate. I had found him in the archive room on the 17th floor. I had found him in the basement documentation room. I had found him in the library at 3 a.m, and in the penthouse kitchen at 7, and in his mother's room at the Crest. This time I was looking for a specific set of material samples I'd left in the archive the week before, copper fragments from the Detroit project, the Foundation's first commissioned documentation work, which I needed for a presentation to the Trust's board on Thursday. I had my access card. I had come down at 8 a.m, before the building populated, in the particular solitude of early hours in a large building, with the specific focused calm of someone who knows exactly what they're looking for. I found the samples in 20 minutes. On my way back to the elevator, I passed the door behind the filing cabinets, the door I had first noticed months ago, the door whose existence I'd filed and not acted on. It was open. Not conspicuously, not widely. A few inches, the specific opening of a door that had been pulled to but not latched. Through the gap, light, warm and low, the quality of a single lamp in a small space. I had learned by now which doors in this building to push and which to wait for. But the open door felt different from the locked ones, less like a boundary and more like an invitation, the specific few inches open that communicates, I am not hiding, I am simply here. I pushed the door open. The room was small, smaller than the archive, smaller than the documentation room, a space that had been created by subdivision rather than design, the kind of room that exists because someone needed a room and had space to make one. The walls were bare except for two things, a single lamp on a small table, and on the wall opposite the door, a painting. Adrian was standing in front of the painting. He heard me come in. He didn't turn immediately, the specific deliberateness of someone who is deciding whether to acknowledge an intrusion or to complete the moment they're in. Then he turned, and his face was the stripped version, the fully open one, and I understood from the quality of the openness that he had been standing in this room for some time. "How long have you known about this room?" I asked. "Since before the building was finished," he said. "I designed it." I looked at the painting on the wall. Small, perhaps 30 centimeters by 40, oil on panel, the kind of scale that requires very precise brushwork, nothing hidden in the gesture. It showed a woman in a studio. She was seated at a drafting table, but not working, her hands were in her lap, and she was looking toward a window, the specific quality of someone lost in thought, somewhere between intention and reverie. The light in the painting was the light I had been working with for a year. The light of old glass, the fractured, specific, unrepeatable quality of pre-war windows at a particular afternoon hour. I knew her face from the photograph on Adrian's desk, from the line of her, visible in him, from the way Alina had painted her in the Crest painting, the same profile, the same quality of attention even in repose. Marguerite Kane, in a studio, in the light she had spent her career understanding. I looked at the painting for a long time. Then I walked to it, carefully, and looked at the back of the panel. The inscription was in ink, clear and deliberate. 2 lines, a name, a date, and a sentence that sat in the small room like a held breath. Marguerite, 1991, painted by Richard Cresswell, the only honest thing I ever made. I turned back to Adrian. He was watching me read it with the expression of someone who has been carrying a specific weight for a specific time and has arrived at the moment of putting it down. When did you find it? I asked. It was in the documents he left, he said. The bequest, not listed, not labeled, just wrapped in brown paper at the bottom of one of the archive boxes. I found it 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, while I was still in London. He had been carrying this for 3 weeks. You didn't tell me, I said, not accusingly, nodding. I didn't know what to say, he said. I still don't know entirely, but I didn't want to keep it from you past tonight. I looked at the painting again, at the woman looking at the light, at the specific quality of care in the brushwork, not the work of a casual painter, not the work of someone producing a record. The work of someone who had looked at this woman with total, specific, irreducible attention and had done their best to honor what they saw. The only honest thing I ever made. He loved her, I said, not a question, the statement of something that was visible in the paint. Yes, Adrian said. I've been sitting with that for 3 weeks. That the person who obstructed her career, who used his power to control her professional life when she refused him personally, who spent 15 years obstructing everything I built, that person loved her. Genuinely. In the way that is visible in how you paint someone's face. The room was very quiet. That doesn't excuse it, I said. No, he said. It doesn't. Love that manifests as control and harm is still harm. The loving doesn't change the damage. He paused. But it changes my understanding of the shape of it. He wasn't a monster in the simple sense. He was a person who loved something he couldn't have and responded to that impossibility by trying to possess it instead. And couldn't. And spent 40 years knowing that he had taken something from the world that the world needed because he couldn't stop himself. He was looking at the painting while he spoke, not at me, at her. The only honest thing I ever made, I said slowly. He knew. He knew exactly what he'd done and what he was, and the painting is the record of who he wished he had been. The version of him that simply loved her and left her in her light. Yes, Adrian said. What are you going to do with it? I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. The longest of all the pauses I had accumulated over 16 months of knowing him. The pause of a man at the end of a 15-year story, standing in a room he built for himself, holding the last piece of something he had been trying to understand for as long as he could remember. I don't know yet, he said, the honest answer, the answer that a year ago he would not have been able to give. I need to sit with it longer. He stopped. I need to decide whether it should be seen, whether its seeing would serve something or whether it is private, whether the world needs to know that he loved her or whether that knowledge is between this painting and this room and the people who are standing in it. I looked at the painting, at Marguerite Kane in her light, painted by a man who had never learned to love without possessing and who had known, at the end of his life, that the one true thing he had ever made was the record of his failure to do so. She should decide, I said. He looked at me. She can't, I said. She's not here, but the foundation is named for her. The work we're doing is in her name. If there's a decision to be made about what her story contains and what it doesn't, that decision should be made in the spirit of what she believed. I paused. She believed that things held the memory of what happened to them, that the materials carried the truth. She would not, I think, choose to hide a true thing simply because the true thing is complicated. He looked at the painting for a long time. No, he said finally, she wouldn't. Then you have your answer, I said. Not today, when you're ready, but eventually the painting should be seen, because it is part of the full record, and the full record is what you built the foundation to tell. He turned to look at me. His face was, I don't have the right word for what his face was in that moment. Every version of him I had ever known was present in it simultaneously. The controlled and the open, the afraid and the brave, the man who had spent 15 years building against something, and the man who had arrived at what came after. He crossed the room. He held my face in his hands, the gesture, the language, the thing that meant everything he hadn't found the words for yet. I don't know what I would do, he said, very quietly, without you here to tell me the things I can't see clearly. You would figure them out eventually, I said. You always do, I just make it faster. Faster, he said, the almost smile, and better. Faster and better, I agreed. He kissed me in the small room with the lamp, and the painting and the first light of the October morning coming through the gap at the bottom of the door. The low, specific light of a building that had been holding secrets for 15 years and had finally, thoroughly, run out of them. Chapter 2. What we tell Alina. Violet, the same day. We told Alina together. This felt right, not as a formal decision, but in the way that right things feel when you approach them. The painting was part of the story that included her, that had shaped the years she'd spent in this building, that connected the version of Adrian she'd known and loved and been harmed by and stayed with to the version that stood beside me in the small basement room. She deserved to know. And she deserved to hear it from both of us, because the both of us was itself part of what she'd helped make possible. We went up to the 17th floor at 10 in the morning. Alina was at her canvas, the new work, the portrait of Adrian that was slowly taking shape with the patient, unrushed quality of someone who understood that the most important portraits require the most time. She heard us come in and set down her brush without being asked, which told me she had been expecting something. Adrian told her about the painting. He told it in the same stripped, direct way he told the things that cost him, without management, without the performance of affect, the plain account of what the room contained and what the inscription said. Alina listened without interrupting. Her face was very still. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time, long enough that I counted internally, not impatiently, just nodding. One of the qualities I had most come to love about Alina was her refusal to rush the significant moments. She lived inside them fully before she responded to them. He painted her, she said finally. Yes. From the light in her work, she said. From the way she understood light. Yes. She turned to look at her canvas, the portrait of Adrian in progress, the face she'd been studying for weeks. She looked at it for a moment with the assessing painter's gaze. I understand it, she said. Not as an excuse, but I understand the shape of it. A person who loves something they cannot hold chooses to try to hold it, and the holding destroys the thing, and the destruction is a form of grief that they live with forever. She paused. He lived with it for 40 years. The painting is the evidence that he knew. Yes, Adrian said. That is not forgiveness, Alina said. Knowing what you've done and feeling the weight of it, that is not the same as being forgiven. Your mother didn't get the career she would have had. The crest spent 15 years in danger. The harm is real regardless of whether the person who caused it understood it. I know, he said. But, she said, and her voice shifted slightly, the shift of someone moving from the ethical judgment to the human one. It is something that he knew, that he made the one honest record of it, that he left it to you. She stood up from her stool and walked to Adrian and put her hand briefly against his arm, the Alina version of a great deal of physical warmth, which was this. A hand on an arm, brief, deliberate, the touch of someone who does not touch lightly and means everything when she does. She is in the light, Alina said. In the painting. She is in her light and she is beautiful and she is herself. Whatever he did with the rest of it, he got that right. Adrian's throat moved. Yes, he said, he got that right. Alina withdrew her hand. She went back to her stool. She picked up her brush. The foundation launch, she said. What are you going to do about the painting? It stays in the room, he said. For now, until the right moment. How will you know the right moment? She asked. He looked at me. I'll know, he said. Alina looked at the two of us with a private smile. Yes, she said, you will. She went back to painting. We stayed in the room for a while, not speaking much, the three of us in the comfortable, habitual quiet of people who have spent enough time together that silence is not uncomfortable, but inhabited. Outside the window, October was doing what it did in New York, the specific quality of the light and the air that made the city feel, for a few weeks every year, like its truest self. The clarity that came after summer's heat. The colors that arrived in the trees of the parks and the reflected light off the river, and the particular low angle of the autumn sun that turned the city's glass towers amber in the late afternoon. I thought about the painting in the small basement room, about Marguerite Kane in her light, about the full record of a story that was also, in a way I hadn't anticipated, a love story, the painful, costly, irredeemable kind, but a love story nonetheless. I thought this is what the installation was made from, not just the materials of her building. The full complex truth of a life that built something extraordinary and was harmed by someone who loved it badly. I thought, the light in the atrium is her light. It will be there long after everything else. I thought, that is enough. That is more than enough. Chapter 3. The Foundation Launch. Violet, October 15th. The morning of October 15th, I stood in my studio on the 18th floor and watched the city wake up. It was early, before 6, the building still mostly quiet, the street below in the specific state of a city between night and day, the last of the night's population giving way to the first of the mornings. The light was coming up over the East River, doing what October light did at this latitude and this hour. Arriving with the particular quality of something that understands it has to work harder now, the sun lower, the angle more acute, the light choosing its surfaces with the precision of a painter who knows they don't have unlimited time. I had a cup of coffee. I had my sketchbook open. Though I hadn't been drawing, the sketchbook was a comfort object as much as a tool, the familiar weight of it in the lap, the blank pages available if they were needed. I had been in this studio for a year and 3 weeks. I had made the most important work of my life in it. I was leaving for London again in January for the formal opening of the museum installation, and after that, there would be a decision about what came next. The Foundation's second commission, a conversation I'd been having with a museum in Berlin, the crest restoration, which needed its own artistic documentation project, and for which I was the obvious person. The next things were clear. They were good. They were the kind of things that made me understand, when I looked at them, that I was living the full-size version of my life. Tonight, 300 people were going to come into the atrium of Kane Tower and stand underneath the installation and look at the light through the old glass and read, on the placard beside the entrance, that the Marguerite Kane Foundation was being launched in this space. On this day, in memory of a woman who had believed that buildings were love letters and who had written her best one in the hills of upstate New York. Alina's painting of the crest would be installed on the east wall of the atrium, beside the installation's main structural element. The two together, the installation and the painting, would be the beginning of the Foundation's public identity. The thing it stood for made visible in 2 forms, the material and the witnessed, the salvage and the record. I thought about standing in the atrium last February with Sophia Reyes, the installation opening, the light doing what I'd designed it to do. Sophia had said, "Thank you for being the person who stayed, for the right reasons." I thought, I am still here. The right reasons are still the right reasons. They have not changed. They have, if anything, become more certain. The door to the studio opened. I knew his footsteps. He came in with coffee for himself, and the specific quality of early morning presence he had, the softened surface, the slightly undone edge that existed only in the first hour, before the professional calibration settled fully into place. He was in his suit. He'd have meetings before the evening event, but his collar was still open, and his jacket was over his arm, and he looked like himself in the way he only looked like himself when no one was watching except me. He stopped beside me at the window, looked out at the city. "How are you?" he asked. "Ready," I said. "You?" A pause. "Ready," he said, and something else, something I don't have the right word for. "Tell me the approximation," I said. He considered it, looking at the city. "The feeling of arriving somewhere you set out for a very long time ago," he said. "When you've been walking so long that the walking has become the thing, and then suddenly there's the destination, and it's exactly what you hoped it would be, and what you feel is not triumph or satisfaction. It's quiet, the specific quiet of something completed." I looked at him. "That's not an approximation," I said. "That's it exactly." He looked at me with the something enormous. "You made this," he said. "You know that. The installation, the foundation, the whole of what tonight represents, you are the reason it has the shape it has." "We made it," I said. "The 3 of us, and Nora, and Sophia in her way, and your mother who made it first." "Yes," he said. "But you," he stopped. I came into this year with a plan, a 15-year plan and a specific structure and a set of outcomes I was building toward. And you walked into the wrong elevator, and in 16 months you have changed the shape of everything. Not by doing it differently, by doing it truly. I looked at him. At 16 months of accumulation, the sketchbooks and the glass and the road trips and the hospital and the photographs and the basement rooms and the library and London and the small painting of his mother in the light. I walked into the wrong elevator, I said. You walked into the wrong elevator, he said. That you had malfunctioned. The real smile. That I had malfunctioned, he confirmed, deliberately. The least subtle manipulation in a long history of subtle manipulation. Significantly less subtle than the average, he agreed. And yet here we are. And yet here we are, he said. The city was fully waking up now, the street below filling with the morning's traffic of people going toward their days. The light was doing the October thing, warming as it climbed, touching the glass of the towers across the way with the amber that only this latitude at this season produced. Tonight, I said. Tonight, he said. It's going to be good. It's going to be extraordinary, he said. You have to stop saying that. I will stop saying it, he said, when it stops being true, which I maintain I don't anticipate. I leaned into him, which was the thing I did in the mornings. The specific, unceremonious comfort of it, the shoulder and the arm, the ordinary intimacy of two people who have decided to be near each other and are. He put his arm around me. We stood at the studio window and watched the city come into its day, and the light come into its full October expression, and the building was around us with everything it held, and the evening was ahead with what it would become. We didn't need to say anything else. Some mornings are the thing themselves. Chapter 4. 300 people in the light. Violet that evening. By 8 o'clock, 300 people were in the atrium. I had positioned myself near the east wall, not centrally, not performing any host function, which was never a role I was comfortable with. I had made the installation. I was present at its second significant public occasion. That was enough. The hosting was his, and he did it with the particular quality of a man who had learned, over 16 months of learning the distinction, the difference between controlling a room and being present in one. He moved through the atrium with the ease of someone who belonged there, not the old ease of ownership, the managed presence of a man ensuring his domain was performing correctly. The ease of someone who had made something true in a space and was now living inside the truth of it. I watched him from the east wall. He had spoken at 7:30, 10 minutes, no notes, the direct and precise quality that was his natural register when he was speaking about something real. He had talked about his mother, about salvage, about the specific quality of light through old glass. He had talked about a woman who had believed that buildings were love letters and had written one that he had spent 15 years trying to protect. He had talked about what the foundation would do, the buildings at risk, the materials worth saving, the specific kind of work that existed at the intersection of memory and architecture. He had not performed. He had spoken directly to the room, and the room had been very quiet, and at the end there was a moment. One of the moments that happens sometimes in spaces where something true has been said, where no one moved, where the silence was its own response before the applause began. Elena's painting was on the east wall behind me. I had watched people approach it all evening with the specific quality of attention that paintings draw when they are very good. The approach, the stopping, the leaning slightly forward, the specific stillness of someone being arrested by something they weren't fully prepared for. I watched people stand in front of Elena's crest and look at the small figure in the lower right corner and understand, without being told, that the figure was someone important, that she was at home in the light she'd made, that the painting was a record of someone present in their own best work. Above us, the installation was doing what it always did, different now than in February, October light at this hour, 8 in the evening. The sky outside the skylights the specific deep blue of an autumn evening, the installation lit by the building's panels positioned to approximate what the afternoon light had been. The glass doing its living thing, the beams from the crest warm in the structure, the whole of it breathing slowly in the atrium's air. Nora appeared at my elbow. She was in her professional configuration, legal pad, pen, the specific readiness of someone who has managed an event of this complexity and is tracking the 15 things that require tracking while appearing to be merely present. "How is it?" I asked her. "It is exactly as it should be," she said. The highest possible praise from Nora, which was the simple statement of correctness. "How is he?" I asked. She looked across the atrium to where Adrian was in conversation with a group that included the Preservation Trust's director and 2 architects I recognized from the Foundation's first project list. His face, from this distance, was the open one, the listening face, the one that meant he was actually hearing what was being said rather than managing toward a response. "He is as he should be," Nora said. "Also." I looked at her. "Nora." She turned to look at me with the composed, professional gaze. "Thank you," I said, "for 8 years of this, for the folder left open, for calling me first, for building the foundation infrastructure before he asked you to." She was quiet for a moment. The Nora quiet, the one that contained what she was not going to perform. "Thank you," she said, "for walking into the wrong elevator." A pause. "You knew," I said, "about the elevator he told you." "He told me 6 months before it happened," she said. "He told me he was going to arrange a meeting with an artist he needed to commission. He described the method." The faintest suggestion of something that was not quite a smile moved across her face. "I told him it was the least elegant plan he'd ever devised. He said it was the only one that would work." "Was he right?" She looked at the atrium, at the installation, at Alina's painting, at him across the room laughing at something the preservation director had said, the real laugh, the full one. "He was right," she said, "in the way that he is occasionally right about things that seem completely wrong until they're not." She moved away with the efficiency of someone who has 3 things to attend to. I watched her go and thought about 8 years of that woman in that building, maintaining the conditions, anticipating the requirements, filing everything and nodding everything and calling the right person first. I looked at the room, at 300 people in the light that his mother had designed. At Alina, who had come downstairs for the first time to an event of this scale. She was near the painting, speaking to a woman I didn't recognize, her hands moving the way they moved when she was explaining something about the work. Alive and present and here, in the room, in the full life she had come back to. At Adrian, who had turned from the preservation director and was now looking across the atrium, looking for me in the room the way he always looked for me in rooms. The quick, specific search that was the most consistent tell he had, the searching that happened so automatically I was certain he didn't fully know he did it. He found me, the inventory check. Then the expression that was only for me, the one that had no category in his controlled surfaces vocabulary, the one that lived beneath all the categories. I raised my coffee glass slightly. He raised his. The atrium was full of light and people and the sound of a room where something true was happening. The installation was overhead, alive in the October evening. His mother's work was in the beams and the glass, permanent. Alina's painting was on the wall, witness to everything. This was the room. This was the moment. This was the thing that had been assembling itself since a November night when a woman in a champagne-stained dress had pressed the wrong elevator button and walked into a room she wasn't supposed to be in. The right room. Always, it had always been the right room. He found me at 10 o'clock. The guests were still present. The evening was not yet over. The conversations still running with the specific energy of a room full of people who have been given something real to think about and are thinking about it. But he had extricated himself from the center of it with the focused, efficient purposefulness of someone who has identified a specific destination. He came to the east wall where I was standing in front of Alina's painting, not talking to anyone, not performing, just looking at the small figure at the windows, looking at the light that Alina had seen and recorded and given permanent form. He stood beside me. We were quiet for a moment. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking about light," I said. About what it means that light is the thing that persists. The materials hold memory, but the light is what makes the memory visible. Without the light, the glass is just glass. Without the light, the beams are just wood. I paused. Your mother understood that. The whole point of her salvage practice was not the materials themselves. It was what the materials did with light. She was a light architect. That's what she was. He was very still beside me. I've never put it that way, he said. Neither has anyone else, I said. But look at the crest. Look at the installation. Look at this painting. Every piece of her work is organized around what happens when light meets material that has lived. That's the thesis. Everything else is the argument in support of it. He looked at the painting, at the small figure at the windows. The foundation, he said slowly. The work it's going to do, we've been framing it as salvage, as material preservation. But what you're saying. It's light preservation, I said. The salvage is the method. The light is the point. He was quiet for a long moment. I could see him thinking, the visible thinking, the specific quality of someone working something out that has implications he's tracking forward. The foundation's statement, he said. We need to rewrite the statement. Tonight, I said. No, he said. Tomorrow, but... Tomorrow, I agreed. He looked at the painting for another moment. Then he turned to look at me, the full turn, the full attention. I want to ask you something, he said. Something in his voice, not the evening's tone, not the professional or the personal, something more fundamental, the tone of the very serious things. Ask, I said. Not tonight, he said. Not in this room, but soon. I looked at him, at the face that was everything I had learned to read over 16 months, the controlled and the open and all the gradations between. At the something enormous that was looking at me with the specific quality of something that has been decided and is waiting for the right moment to be said. All right, I said, soon. Soon, he confirmed. We stood in front of Alina's painting in the atrium of the building he had built, in the light of the installation I had made, and the room was full of people, and the evening was full of the quality of something that had arrived at its right place, and the something enormous between us was present and patient and waiting for the right room. Chapter 5. The morning after. Violet, October 16th. I woke to a building that had the specific quality of the day after something significant. Not empty. The building was never empty in the meaningful sense. Alina on 17. The company beginning its day on the floors above. The foundation's new office on the 36th floor that Nora had arranged with the quiet efficiency of someone who had decided that the infrastructure should be ready before the announcement. But there was a stillness to the morning, the specific stillness that comes after something has been said that needed to be said, the quiet of a room after the difficult conversation that has finally happened. I lay in the bed in the penthouse and looked at the ceiling and thought about the evening, about 300 people in the light, about Alina at the painting, explaining it to a stranger with her hands, about Nora's exactly as it should be, about his voice when he said not tonight, soon. I knew what soon meant. I had known it was coming for months, in the specific way that you know things that are real before they are said. I had known it the way I knew the installation was going to work before the first beam was in place, not as a conclusion, but as a certainty that preceded the evidence, the certainty of something you understand in the material before you can articulate it in the language. I was not afraid. This surprised me slightly. I had expected some fear, the appropriate fear of a large thing approaching, the fear of what it would mean and what it required and whether I was ready. But lying in the October morning light with the city audible below, I was not afraid. I was ready. He was already up. I could hear him in the kitchen, the coffee, the quiet, the sound of him in the morning being the person he was in the mornings, which was one of my favorite versions. I had been accumulating these versions for 16 months, and the collection was large now, detailed, the portrait of someone I knew with the specific depth of close attention over sufficient time. I got up. I went to the kitchen. He was at the counter with his coffee and a notebook, not the professional notebook, the other one, the one that lived in the library and that he wrote in rarely, with the specific sparseness of someone who wrote only the things that required more than keeping in his head. He looked up when I came in. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." I made coffee. I sat across from him at the kitchen table. The October morning was coming through the window, the specific quality of it, the light I'd been thinking about the night before, the light that understood it had to work harder now and was choosing its surfaces with care. "What are you writing?" I asked. He looked at the notebook. "The foundation statement," he said. "The rewrite, light preservation, I've been up since 5. "Can I see?" He slid the notebook across the table. I read what he'd written, 3 paragraphs. The first was about his mother, specific, clear, the precise and honest account of what she had understood and what she had built. The second was about the installation, the specific principle at work, the salvaged materials and what they did with light, the way the crest lived inside Kane Tower through the quality of its glass. The third was the foundation's articulation of itself, not a preservation organization in the conventional sense, a light organization. An organization dedicated to the specific, irreplaceable quality of light through materials that had lived. I set the notebook down. "This is better than what we had," I said. "Yes," he said, "I think so." "Send it to Nora." "Already sent," he said. "At 6. She replied at 6:15 with 7 suggested edits, all of which are correct." I looked at him. "You emailed Nora at 6 in the morning." "She was already working," he said, with the expression of someone who has long since stopped being surprised by this. "She had the Foundation's November calendar restructured by the time I sent the statement. She included a note that said, 'The third paragraph is the best thing you've written since the installation placard,' which I intend to interpret as extremely high praise." I laughed. He smiled, the real one. We were quiet for a moment, the good kind. The kind that comes after a long, full, significant thing and is itself a form of integration. The quiet of 2 people absorbing what has happened and finding that what has happened is, on examination, good. "The crest," he said. "The restoration team has the full architectural record now, the documented drawings and the Cresswell documents together. They think the main room can be restored to the 1987 specification. The original glass, where it exists. The salvaged materials, where it doesn't." "Good," I said. "The architect, Priya, the one they engaged, she wants to talk to you. About the light in the main room. She says the documentation describes it, but doesn't explain it." "It can't be explained," I said. "It has to be stood in." "I told her that," he said. "She said, then I need the person who stood in it." I looked at the October light through the penthouse window, at the quality of it, at the way it was doing the October thing, choosing its surfaces. "I'll go," I said, "in the spring, when the light is right." "The spring," he said. Something in the word spring. The season we'd been moving toward since November of the previous year, the one I'd told him to ask me about when it arrived. Ask me in the spring. "It's not quite spring," I said. "No," he agreed, "not quite. But it's closer than it was." "Yes," he said, "much closer." We looked at each other across the kitchen table. The October morning between us, the city below, the building around us with everything it held. Chapter 6. What he asks in the right room. Violet, October 20th. He took me to the crest on a Saturday. Not the scheduled visit with the restoration team. That was in the calendar, 3 weeks away, the professional occasion with its professional requirements. This was different. This was the 2 of us, the gray car, the drive north in the October morning, the trees in their full October colors for the first time since I'd been coming here, the bare November branches of my first visit replaced by the full extravagance of fall. The crest in October was something I hadn't seen before. The stone of it the same, the roof lines the same, his mother's specific understanding of how a building should relate to its landscape unchanged after all the seasons. But the trees around it were extraordinary, the colors of them, the specific quality of the October light coming through them at this angle, at this latitude, in this part of the world that his mother had chosen for a reason. She had chosen it for the light. I understood this now completely, standing at the edge of the property and looking at the building in its October context. She had chosen this place because of what the October light did here, because of how the trees would frame the building in this season and what the low autumn sun would do to the windows she'd chosen and positioned. The building was designed for this moment, among all the moments of all the seasons, designed to be most fully itself in this light, in this company of colors, in this specific and unrepeatable October quality. We walked the property for an hour before going inside. He walked beside me and let me look in the way he'd learned to let me look, without narrating, without directing, without filling the looking with language. He had learned that I needed the space of the looking before I could talk about what I was seeing. He had learned this because he paid attention. He had been paying attention for 4 years. Inside, the main room. The floor-to-ceiling windows. The old glass, still in place. The restoration team hadn't begun work here yet, and the original windows were intact, the same glass I'd stood in front of in November almost a year ago, the same glass whose fragments were in the installation overhead in the Kane Tower atrium, the same glass that Alina had painted, the same glass I'd been thinking about since the first moment I'd understood what it did. October light through old glass. It was the best version of it I'd seen. Better than November, better than January, better than the spring visits. October light at this latitude in the afternoon was the thing itself, warm but not soft, direct but not harsh, carrying in it the full knowledge of what was coming and the specific generous quality of something making the most of the time it had. I stood in the center of the room and looked up and around and felt the light the way you feel it when you've spent a year understanding how to receive it. He was behind me. I heard him stop. I knew from the quality of his stillness that he was doing the thing he did in the presence of things that moved him, going very quiet, the complete internal stillness. I turned. He was not, as I'd expected, looking at the windows. He was looking at me. The light from the old glass was behind me, falling across the room and across him in the fractured, specific, unrepeatable way of this glass at this hour. The amber and gold of it. The particular quality that his mother had designed this room to hold. He was looking at me the way he'd looked at the installation when he'd walked into it for the first time. The way he'd looked at Alina's painting on the wall of the atrium. The way he looked at old glass held up to afternoon light. With the full measure, with everything he had. "Violet," he said. Not a question. The statement of a name, the way he said it when the name was the whole sentence. "I know," I said very quietly. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of me, clothes, the specific clothes of someone who has arrived at the place they were moving toward and has no further distance to close. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat. What he took out was not what I expected. I had been waiting, I realized, with the subterranean awareness that had been building since not tonight, soon, for something conventional. The specific conventional gesture of a specific conventional moment. But this was Adrian Kane, who did nothing conventionally, who had spent 16 months learning to do the thing directly and still, when it mattered most, found a way to say it that was entirely, uniquely his. It was a piece of glass. Small, worn at the edges in the specific way of material that has been handled many times over many years. The quality of the glass, old, pre-war, the slight waviness of pre-industrial manufacture, was familiar in the way of something I had worked with extensively, intimately, the way you know old glass when you've spent a year making things from it. I looked at it in his hand. "This is from the crest," I said. "From this room," he said. "One of the original panes had a small breakage. The restoration team found it when they began the assessment. A fragment about this size. I asked if I could have it." He paused. "I've been carrying it since August." August, since London. He had been carrying a piece of his mother's room in his coat since London. "I've been trying to find the right room," he said. "The right moment. I tried 3 times in the library at the Portobello Market after the foundation launch. Every time it felt like the wrong room." He looked at the room around us. At the windows, the light, the specific October afternoon. "This is the right room." He held the glass out to me. I took it. It was warm from his hand. Through it, The light scattered in the specific way of old glass, fractured, multiply, refracted, giving the light back transformed. "I want to build a life with you," he said, directly, simply, without the ceremony of formal phrasing. Not an arrangement, not a managed outcome, a life, with all the things that means the work and the foundation and the crest and Alina and the shelf of salvaged things and the arguments and the learning and the things I'm going to get wrong and the things I'm going to ask for help with. He held my gaze. "I want the full version. I want you, fully, in the permanent sense, in the way that is a choice we make and keep making." The room held his words. The light moved through the old glass. I looked at the piece of glass in my hand, the fragment from this room, from his mother's best room, the room that held the best light she'd ever designed for. A room that was, in its way, also a love letter. I looked at the man in front of me, at 16 months of knowing him, at the 4 years before that, him watching and building and preparing for a person he didn't yet know. At the 15 years before that, carrying his mother's story toward the right moment. At everything he was, the controlled and the open, the afraid and the learning, the man who built structures instead of asking and who was, now, asking directly. Without a structure. Without infrastructure. Just him, in the right room, with a piece of glass from his mother's window. "Yes," I said. One word, the right word, the only word. His face did the thing. The real smile, the full one, and beneath it, beneath all the smiles and the enormous things and the 16 months of accumulation, something that had been held for a very long time releasing completely, the specific quality of a door held open for years finally opening. He held my face in his hands and looked at me, the full attention, all of it, everything, and the light from his mother's windows moved across us both, and the October afternoon was in the room, and the crest was around us with its 40 years of memory. He kissed me in the room. That was the best thing his mother had made. In the light, she had spent her career understanding. In the place where everything she had believed about buildings, that they were love letters, that materials held memory, that light through old glass carried the history of what it had touched, was most fully, most perfectly true. Outside, the October trees were extraordinary. Inside, the light moved. Chapter 7. What remains? Violet, Elena, Nora, Adrian, October and after. Later that afternoon, I sat in the main room of the crest with the piece of glass in my hand and watched the light change. Adrian was in another part of the building. I could hear him moving through the rooms with the quality of presence he had in places he was reclaiming, the unhurried attention of someone for whom a space was becoming, incrementally, safe to love. I had stayed in the main room because I needed the specific privacy of the good moments to absorb them properly. I held the glass up to the window. The light came through it in the way that I had spent a year learning to understand. Fractured, multiplied, scattered across the room in patterns that were never quite the same because the light was never quite the same. The afternoon moving on, the angle shifting, the patterns changing. I thought about the first time I'd stood at the windows in the Kane Tower studio, 8 months ago, and held old glass up to the November afternoon, and felt the thing I always felt when I worked with salvaged materials. The specific, particular sense of something that had lived in a space, carrying the memory of that space in its substance. The sense that was not mystical, not sentimental, but material. Real. The physics of imperfect glass and the light it had been refracting for decades. I thought about what I was going to make next. The London installation had been about competing axes, multiple conversations, the way a complex space holds contradictory things simultaneously. The Kane Tower installation had been about memory and salvage and what persists. The next thing would be something else. I didn't know the form yet. I didn't know the location. I didn't know the materials. I knew only the principle that had been clarifying for me since October, since standing in this room and understanding what his mother had understood. Light preservation. The specific, irreplaceable quality of light through materials that had lived. The way a building could be designed not just to be in the light, but to hold it, to participate in its meaning, to create the conditions for the light to be most fully itself. The next thing would be that. In some form I couldn't yet see but could feel the shape of, the way you feel the shape of a piece before you've begun it, in the material before the language. Adrian came back to the room. He stood in the doorway and looked at me with the particular quality of looking he had in places where we had been through something significant together. The added depth of the room's meaning in the look, the way a location accumulates its history in the way you see it. "Ready," he said. I looked at the windows one more time, at the light. "Yes," I said, "let's go home." Elena finished the portrait of Adrian in November. She had been working on it since September, returning to it daily with the patient, committed quality she brought to the things she understood were important. She had told me, in October, that she was painting the version of him she hadn't been able to paint before, the version that existed after the setting down of the heavy thing, the version that was learning to occupy its own life rather than the life built against something. When she showed it to us, it was late November, the city doing the thing it did at the beginning of winter, the specific quality of the cold coming in, the light shortening, the first real edge of the season that had been threatening since October. The portrait was remarkable in the way that her best work was remarkable. It looked like him and also like more than him, the way portraits do when the painter has understood the person rather than merely observed them. She had painted him at the penthouse window, his window, the place he'd always stood to look at the city. But in her painting, he was not looking out. He was looking to the side, slightly, the specific angle of someone who has heard something from a direction they hadn't expected and has turned toward it. Turning toward rather than away. The expression on his face in the painting was the one I knew, the enormous unguarded thing, the full measure, the face he had been learning to show for the past year. Elena had caught it with the precision of someone who had been watching it develop from the first tentative appearances to the habitual ease of the present. In the lower left corner, in the light coming through the painted window, a small, almost invisible element, a piece of glass, the old glass quality, the waviness, the light scattered through it across the painted floor. I looked at it for a long time. "You put the glass in," I said. "Of course," Elena said. Adrian was very still beside me, looking at the portrait. I could feel the quality of his looking without turning to see his face. "Elena," he said finally. "Yes. It's—" "I know," she said, with the composure of someone who has made something that does what she intended it to do and is not surprised. He turned to look at her. The full attention, the enormous thing, directed at this woman who had been through so much and was here, in her studio on the 17th floor, recovered and working and present. "Thank you," he said, the two words that carried everything. "Don't thank me," Elena said. "Hang it somewhere the light can reach it." Nora reorganized her office in December. This was not a significant act, not the kind that warranted notice. But Violet noticed, because Violet noticed things, and what she noticed was that Nora had added, to the wall above her desk, where previously there had been only the organizational matrix of the building's operational calendar, a photograph. Small, framed simply. The three of them in the atrium at the foundation launch, Violet and Adrian and Elena, taken by someone whose identity Violet couldn't identify. Not posed. A candid, the three of them in conversation, the installation overhead, Elena's painting visible in the background. All three of them looking at something outside the frame, the specific quality of people mid-thought, mid-conversation, mid-becoming. The light in the photograph was the installation's light. Violet stopped in the doorway of Nora's office one morning and looked at the photograph and thought about 8 years of a woman choosing to be excellent in the building that held this story. About the folder left open, and the call made first, and the foundation infrastructure built before it was asked for. She said, "Nora." Nora looked up from her legal pad. "You're in it," Violet said. "Whatever comes next, you know that." A pause, the Nora pause, the one that contained what she was not going to perform. "I know," Nora said. "I've been in it for 8 years." "I mean specifically," Violet said. "In the next thing, the foundation, the crest, the work we're doing, I want you to know that we know what you've built here, not just the infrastructure, what you've made possible." Nora looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind her professional composure, something real, something that was not performed. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome," Violet said. "Also, the November calendar has a conflict on the 14th. Nora looked down at her legal pad. "I know," she said. "I've already resolved it." A pause. "I resolved it on October 30th. Violet looked at her. "Of course you did," she said. She went back to the studio. Adrian stood at the penthouse window on a night in late November and looked at the city. He did this still. He would do it for the rest of his life, probably. The window was structural. The view was load-bearing. The relationship between himself and the city laid out below was as fundamental as anything about him. But it was different now, and had been different for a year and a half, in the way that everything was different after the thing that changes the shape of everything. Before, the window had been his view, his city, his solitude. Now the view was shared, not always in the literal sense, not always with another person beside him, but shared in the way that the world is shared with someone you've let inside it. The city below was the city they had both looked at, from this window, from the studio window, from the hospital corridor, from the car driving north, from a kitchen in Notting Hill. It was theirs now, as much as it was his. He thought about the next year. The crest restoration, which would take the full year, which would require visits and decisions, and the specific quality of attention he brought to things that mattered. The foundation's growing portfolio, 3 projects, identified, 2 more in preliminary conversation, the operational structure that Nora had built now beginning to do what it was built to do. The London installation's formal opening in January, which Violet would attend and which he would attend with her. He thought about the spring. He thought, she said to ask her in the spring. He thought, it is not yet spring. He thought, it is close enough that I can feel it. He thought, in the spring I will ask her in the main room of the crest, in the light that is the best light her mother designed. He stopped himself. He had already asked. In October, with the glass in the right room, she had said yes. That was the asking and the answering. What he was thinking about now was the other question, the formal one, the specific, traditional, ceremony-adjacent one that was different from "I want to build a life with you" in a way that was not about the commitment. The commitment was already there, had been there since at least the installation, had probably been there since the gallery in March 4 years ago, but about the public form of it. The statement made to the world rather than in a room. He thought, she will have opinions about the form. He thought, I should ask her what form she wants before I design the form. He thought, that is the correct approach. He thought, I am learning. Behind him, the library door opened. He heard her footsteps, specific, recognizable, the sound of her returning from the studio, the late-night return of someone who had been making something and had arrived at the place where the making needed to stop and the rest needed to begin. She came and stood beside him at the window. They looked at the city together. "Good night," he said. "Good night," she said. "The Berlin concept is coming. I can feel the shape of it." "Tell me." She told him. He listened with the complete attention. She described the concept, the building's specific relationship with the changing Berlin light, the surviving pre-war glass in several of the old building's windows, the way the cold months would change the installation's quality, and the warm months would change it back. The way the multiplicity of a city that had been remade so many times would speak through the materials if she chose them correctly. He asked the right questions. She answered them. The city was below them, and the night was November cold outside the glass, and the library was warm behind them. "Spring," she said when she'd finished. "What about spring?" She looked at him with the expression I knew as her seeing clearly expression, the one that looked through the surface to the thing underneath. "You've been thinking about spring," she said. "I can tell." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes." "So have I," she said. And I have very specific opinions about the form," she said. "Of course you do," he said. "You should ask me about them." "I am asking," he said. "Right now I'm asking." She looked at him, the full, clear gaze. Something small, she said. At the crest when the spring light is right. The three of us, you and me and Alina, Nora if she wants. The main room with the windows. That's all. That's everything, she said. He looked at her. At the woman who had walked into a wrong elevator and had not apologized for existing, and had found the keys in the sketchbooks, and gone back to Alina the day after finding her, and stood at the kitchen table at midnight, and said I'm in and made something extraordinary from old glass and his mother's salvaged beams, and had given him back the language for his own life. The main room, he said, in the spring. In the spring, she agreed. They stood at the window for a while longer, the city in its November complexity, the river catching the lights, the building around them with everything it held and everything it was still going to hold. I love you, he said. I know, she said. I love you too. The ordinary version. The version you say when the formal declarations have been made, and what remains is the daily, unremarkable, most important truth of it. The window held the city. The building held the story. The studio held the next work. The 17th floor held Alina, who was probably still painting, because Alina Vasic painted in the evenings now with the specific energy of someone who had come back from somewhere difficult and was not going to waste the return. The basement held the small painting of Marguerite Kane in her light. The atrium held the installation. The east wall held Alina's crest. The shelf in the library held the red hook glass and the portobello stone and the Detroit copper and the fragment from his mother's window. All of it still here. All of it carrying, in its grain and its glass and its salvaged specificity, the memory of what had happened to it. This was what she had taught him, not just the installation, the principle. The thing his mother had understood and that Violet had arrived at independently, and that was, it turned out, the same thing said from two different directions. Things that have lived carry what they've held. The light through old glass is the light of everything that glass has ever been in. Nothing that mattered is entirely lost. You keep building. You keep making. You carry what you can. And the light finds its way through. The end. The monster who owned me. Parts 1 through 10. The wrong floor. The right room. The light through old glass. Everything that remained.